that's why I want to spend some time on the 7 pillars, because once you understand that, you begin to understand my larger point about why the world we're going to move in is a safer world. So what are the 7 pillars? The first one, obviously, is free market economics. And clearly, if you want the best example of the impact of free market economics, look at China. I remember when I first went to China in 1980, Deng Xiaoping had just begun his reforms, but barely begun. And everybody was wearing Maoist suits, and the city was full of bicycles, and there were no cars in Beijing. I remember I went for a haircut, and I had the best haircut ever in my life, because the barber took about 2 hours to cut my hair. So when he finished, I said, "Thank you very much." He said, "Why did it take so long?" He says, "Why does it matter whether I do 5 haircuts, 10 haircuts, 20 haircuts, I get paid the same. So what's the hurry?" Right? And then when you try and get a taxi in Beijing, 1980, there are 10 taxis, 10 taxi drivers, they keep waiting for taxi, none comes. When you go up to them and say, "I need a taxi," they begin to argue among themselves. It's your turn to drive. It's your turn to drive. Right? Because whether you do 5 rides, 10 rides, you get paid the same. And this is as recently as 1980. And the amazing thing is that China went from that situation where you had no work ethic in a sense, to having the fastest growing economy in the world for 30 years. How? A switch to free market economics. And I'm sure some of you have been to Shanghai, and if you go to Shanghai, you just walk down the streets of Shanghai, you see the workers working all day, and you see the workers working all night. Same workers. Free market economics liberates the energy. So what's the second pillar of Western wisdom? It's mastery of science and technology. And I found in the course of researching my book that I came across a late Nobel Prize winner, Richard Smalley, who said that by 2010, this was a statistic I got from Time magazine, he said 90% of all PhD holders in the world in science and engineering will be Asian. Now maybe it's not 90%, maybe it's 85%, maybe it's 80%, but it's an amazing shift. And you can get anecdotal evidence of this, and I don't know how many of you saw the column by Tom Friedman, where he said he went to a graduation ceremony in some well-known institute of technology in America, and when the list of PhD awardees was read out, their names began with Tan, Lee, Wang, Kumar, Mukesh. He said finally one Paul Morrow saved the day. You know? But that's an indication of how times have changed. And if you want more recent evidence of how the mastery of science and technology is shifting to Asia, just look at what the Chinese have done. They sent a man taking a walk in space, and the Indians have just sent a probe to the moon. That's a leading indicator of how things have changed. So the third pillar of Western wisdom I describe as meritocracy. Now, to explain meritocracy, I just use a simple example of Brazil, and I ask, why is Brazil consistently a soccer superpower, always in the finals or maybe in the finals, but in economic terms, always a middle power? And the simple reason is that when it comes to soccer, the Brazilians look for talent in the upper class, middle class, lower class. And if they find a boy in the slums, in the favelas, who can play football, they say, "Come play for Brazil." They look for talent everywhere. But when it comes to looking for talent in the economic sphere, they go to the upper class, middle class, maybe the upper working class, and then they stop. They don't look for talent everywhere. And if you want the simplest explanation for why Asia is rising, the simplest explanation is that Asia always had the largest pool of brain power, but it also had the world's largest unused pool of brain power. And today, that largest pool of unused brain power is being used. And people from the very bottom have a chance of succeeding. And I tell the story in my book of a young man who was born an untouchable in India. And in India for 2,000 years, if you had been born an untouchable, you lived an untouchable, and you died an untouchable. Your destiny was determined at birth. You could never escape the untouchable curse. But I tell the story of a young man who's untouchable, born in Mumbai, goes to school, but because he's untouchable, he sits in a corner. He has meals. Because he's untouchable, he eats alone. He studies hard, passes the school, gets scholarships, goes to university, gets a PhD from Columbia University, and guess what? Today he's the chief economist of the Reserve Bank of India. So a brain like his, which should have been wasted for 2,000 years, is now being used, and that's why Asia is rising. It's meritocracy. So what's the fourth pillar? I describe it as pragmatism. And of course the best description of pragmatism is the one given by Deng Xiaoping when he said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or a cat is white. If it catches mice, it is a good cat. And with that simple explanation,